Hi everyone, sorry the initial few moments of this drawing video are kind of blown out and you can't see the lines very well. That's one of many frustrations that luckily I was able to fix and get past over the course of the illustration. You'll see I managed to fix the lighting issue, but then I lost several minutes at 2 or 3 different points in the drawing process because my camera was just freezing at its initial frame. And at least while we did lose a little bit of actual drawing footage, it did give me a good idea to talk not just about the actual drawing technique, but the fact that professional artists on many occasions will have to deal with and finish and create an illustration despite a lot of life's everyday hurdles that get in the way. So you'll see finally I got the camera working again for a bit, so you can see it's a matter of sketching things in very lightly, just making sure you're filling the page how you want to and everything is the right general proportions and shape and position, but start with very basic shapes and then keep refining, and only once you know everything is the right shape and size and in the right place, then you start really adding fine details. But going back to the topic of frustrations, you have to be really careful if you feel yourself rushing something just to get it done because the whole process is frustrating. You're almost certainly going to end up with an inferior illustration or whatever project you're working on because of that situation. Especially in drawing, the more frustrated and angry you become, everything tenses up, not just your creative thought process, but your actual body, and you're literally less able to draw nice fluid lines and details. If you're lucky like I was, in the case of this particular illustration, it was a personal project, so there was no tight deadline that I just had to get it done on, so I had as much time as I needed to take breaks, calm down, and fix the actual problems that were causing the frustration before I continued onward. Unfortunately, that is often not the case, and you do have deadlines you have to work with, and you have to get the job done no matter what. All I can say is as you gain professional experience, luckily not only do you gain more actual skills in dealing with situations and getting a professional quality product done no matter what punches life throws at you, you also can develop better skills to deal with stress, but those are going to be specific to any particular person. But going back to the topic of this actual drawing, just like my previous drawing video, this character is also a basic thug in the retro beat-em-up game that we're making called Metro Siege. So just like that other character, I already started with a pixel art sprite of the character already designed, and the idea of this illustration is to have a hand-drawn high-res illustration of the character as well, which might go into the printed manual for the game or promotional art. And I think the most interesting thing about this illustration when compared to the other ones I've been doing is, in part because this was a fat character, I did not want to rely purely on actual black line art to get in the details, and especially the kind of not quite folds, but changes in angle in things like his face and arms, where usually I illustrate muscle-bound and or sinewy characters where thin lines and hatching can do a good job representing the clear, clean delineation that you would see when there's a very round character with a lot of fat under the skin that tends to smooth things out. So I really wanted to leave more to be done in the shading and coloring stage of things, and basically leave more of the line art as a guide in those circumstances. You'll see that not only in the face especially, but also take a look at the shirt. You'll see in the original character sprite design for the video game, he had big vertical stripes in his shirt, and I thought it would be too stark and against the actual design of the shirt to have a black pen line delineating either side of every stripe of the shirt. So you're going to see I otherwise finish inking the character, and then I use a pencil and lightly draw in the lines to delineate each stripe in his shirt, and then I color it, and then after the fact I erase out those pencil guidelines. And you can see in the footage I had moved on to the inking, and I always start with kind of the lesser important things to sort of loosen up and get used to the feeling of the pen, and just in general make sure I build up my confidence in what I'm doing before I move on to the critical things like the face and any really fine details where you really don't want to mess up on. As I've said in previous videos, I like to give away these illustrations to some of our highest paying patrons, and I don't want the line art version to be covered with whiteout corrections. And here you see, or actually not quite see very well, that I've moved on to the face. Sorry, I'm left-handed, so my hand is often blocking where I'm actually drawing. But you could see I detailed the really critical things like the eyes, eyebrows, nose, and mouth, but all of the kind of more subtle shapes that should be there with the roundness of the cheeks and the shadows that would cast, I don't do that with line art. I'm going to rely on shading during the coloring phase to get those kind of details in there. So in general with inking, I start with a medium point pen and do the bulk of the illustration, and then I can switch to a thicker brush to create varied line width and thicken lines to help separate body parts, and usually it's the opposite side of objects that are hit by light. So if the light is on the upper left, the thickest lines will be on the lower right of things. And then I often also go to a very fine point inking pen and get in the really fine details in the kind of dangerous areas that require more detail, like near the eyes, nostrils, and those sorts of things. And as you can see, I finished the general inking process, and after waiting a good half hour to an hour to make sure the ink is completely dry on the paper, I erased and then I make a photocopy of the illustration. And it's this photocopy that I'm going to actually color on. That way, if I make a big mistake with the colors, I don't have to start everything from scratch and start penciling and inking again. I could just make another copy of the kind of kept safe original ink version and just try again with the color process. And you'll see here, because I work with transparent inks, I work with the lightest colors first, let each layer dry, and then build darker and darker shades on top of the now dry, lighter colors beneath. And for those looking for a less expensive and more flexible alternative to alcohol-based art markers, I'll link to a previous video I made where I explain the method I developed, where I actually use printer inks, the CMYK printer inks, but you have to make sure they're pigment-based pigment inks instead of the dye-based ones, which are much more common for inkjet printers, and use dropper bottles that you can order in bulk, in like packs of 50 or 100 at a time, and you can just... And the biggest advantage of this method is those big refill bottles of your primary colors last a very long time. Almost any color you make is going to be predominantly water that you put in the little dropper bottles, and then a few drops of the different primary colors to make virtually any color you need. And you basically just record the formulas that you come up with for any given color, so you can replace that exact color when you run out of the color you've pre-mixed in a dropper bottle. This means when you need a new color, you don't need to place an order online or run down to the local art supply store. You can literally mix any color and any shade you need on the fly, and you can build your sort of pre-mixed collection of colors you use all the time. And then even it becomes easier and easier. Like, let's say you have a range of blues and a range of grays, and then suddenly you need a grayish blue or a bluish gray. You can literally, right on the fly on the palette, add one drop of your blue and one drop of your gray and get a 50% mix of the two. So it becomes extremely fast and convenient, and you have a virtually infinite color range and never have to worry about either not having the color marker you need, or even worse, your marker drying out halfway through coloring a large object like this guy's pants here. And the other great benefit to this technique, which I show a little bit in that original video I linked to, is with different brushes and easy application techniques, you can get a huge variety of great textures during the coloring process that would be virtually impossible or insanely time consuming with markers. And the final benefit is it ends up being drastically less expensive than always needing to get new markers, the markers running out, and you either have to buy refills for the markers that are refillable or entirely new markers to replace those. The trade-off to this technique is, one, obviously you have to get really comfortable with using brush techniques to apply color, so there's more of a learning curve. And also another big one is you need to be coloring illustrations on a paper or illustration board that can take abuse from water, which is why it's also critical to let each layer of color dry before you apply the next. Otherwise you will really damage or destroy your illustration. Also, while you can carry around your pre-mixed inks and some brushes and a palette if you need to, markers tend to be a lot easier to just carry around and use on the go. And you might have noticed that I've already done most of the shading on the shirt and there's no stripes yet. That's one of the other benefits of working with transparent inks, which you could also do this with the alcohol-based markers. If your kind of foundation color of the object is a fairly neutral grayish tone like this blue-gray shirt that he has, you can actually do all of your shading with that base color. And then here you'll see I pencil in the lines to guide me where to put the stripes, and then I'm going to use the same reddish browns that I am in his pants and put in the stripes. And the great thing is that all the shading from the grayish blue of the shirt shows through the reddish brown color, so you've already pre-done all of your shading even for the stripes. So it's a great technique to use that you can indeed use with these inks or with markers. So once I get all these stripes in, I'm just going to continue working in these layers of color to add more color and shading. You'll see later on I actually go back over the darkest shading on the stripes to brighten them back up with an even more reddish brown color. And then again, you just kind of go cautiously working from light to dark. And one of the last things I'm going to do in the process, let it all dry, step away from it, and come back after a while with a fresh eye and make those final judgment calls of should anything be any darker, and make those final finishing touches to further increase the contrast where needed. Or in the cases of, you'll see the highlights on the pants were too light, and I'll actually put a thin layer of that lightest pant color on top of the highlights once again to darken them down a bit so they're a little less bright. So while we watch me make these finishing touches to the coloring of the illustration, I should mention this great music you've been hearing is the soundtrack that we've got so far for Metro Siege, done by the great retro Amiga computer musician John Securis. So far those are the 3 songs that we've got for the game, but he's actually working on a 4th one, which will hopefully make its world premiere, along with the level 1 boss fight and complete level 2 and sneak preview of level 3 on an upcoming Amiga Bill livestream. And here I am after that slight break away from the illustration, coming back and deciding to slightly darken things here and there to add a little bit more contrast to the overall shading and a little more detail. You'll see I emphasize more the kind of creases in the skin near the knuckles and shade that right hand side. Mule's left, this character's named Mule, just darken things a bit. And that's about it. And here is the finished inked version and the finished colored version. Thank you very much for watching.